The Columbus Metropolitan Club was founded in 1976 by 13 women leaders who wanted to be included in the community conversation. I am Sally Bloomfield, and I was one of those 13 women. Having been left out of men's clubs that focused on community issues, it was a priority for us to make the club 100% inclusive.
Today, CMC presents public policy forums every Wednesday at lunch with average attendance of more than 200 people. I'm Tony Bell, and I frequently attend forums, which are open to everyone and present relevant, current, and newsworthy topics. I'm grateful that CMC is nonpartisan and presents many perspectives on every topic.
I'm Jane Scott, President and CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC is open to everyone. We invite you to explore the personal and professional benefits awaiting you at the Metropolitan Club. Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. I'm Ellen Block, Director of Transfer Pricing and Tax Planning at Vertiv, and a member of the Columbus Metropolitan Club Board of Trustees. Today's forum sponsor is Steptoe & Johnson. Today's forum partner is the Central Ohio African American Chamber of Commerce. Our live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Let's thank all those sponsors for their support of today's forum. Today's forum, America's Small Business Incubation Rate and What Ohio is Doing Right, will explore what the future holds for small business entrepreneurs in Central Ohio, and will unpack what the region is doing to help entrepreneurs and small businesses start, grow, and thrive. Please welcome today's speakers. We have Bill LaFayette, owner of Regionomics, Steve Fireman, President and General Counsel of the Economic and Community Development Institute, Cheryl Turnbull, Senior Director of the Keenan Center of Entrepreneurship at The Ohio State University, and our host, Susan Post, editor of the Metropreneurial.com, and associate editor of Columbus Underground. You can learn more about today's speakers in your forum flyer. Susan, we look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Ellen. According to the statistics, America's small business creation rate has been dropping for decades, with business closures even surpassing business births. However, many in Central Ohio see and feel a sentiment that's quite different, that small business creation is thriving. But in the words of our panelist, Bill LaFayette, the numbers are what the numbers are. How can we reconcile these differences? Today, we'll dig into just what the statistics mean, what resource providers like ECDI and the Keenan Center for Entrepreneurship are seeing on the ground in Central Ohio, the impacts of the pandemic on small businesses, and much more. So first, Bill, let's start with the numbers. Can you give us an overview of what you're seeing in regards to this declining small business incubation rate?
Well, Susan, we're not doing all that well, and we haven't been doing all that well for years. I first brought this issue up, believe it or not, back in 2014 when I released my economic forecast on this stage that year. And the rankings were what really troubled me. Out of the 100 largest metros in the U.S., Columbus ranks 86th in the percentage of workers who are self-employed, 85th in the concentration of small firms, and I'm defining small firms as those with fewer than 20 employees, and 74th in our small business birth rate. Now, there has been a scotch of improvement in the self-employment percentage and the business birth rate over the last 15 years, but the small business firm concentration, the percentage of all businesses, hasn't budged.
All right, I'm going to take this down to a local level. So Steve and Cheryl, what are your organizations seeing? And it sounds like it's actually kind of the opposite of what Bill is saying here.
Well, I can start off, and trust me, I am loath and worried about ever disagreeing with Mr. LaFayette and his statistics. However, we are seeing at ECDI the demand greater than we ever have pre and post pandemic. We have a unique niche in that, we are an SBA microloan intermediary, as well as an SBA community advantage lender, and we're also what's called a community development financial institution. And what all that means is our focus is on underbanked and unbanked populations, with even a more honed-in focus on women-owned, minority-owned, and new American businesses. And we are continuing to see the desire and the growth of all of our programs across the board. There's not one area that we are not growing, whether it's in our area of educational services, which I'll go into a little bit more later, our investment services, which is our lending, which has just grown exponentially, or our innovation services, which is our incubation services. All have increased in demand here in Central Ohio and actually throughout the state, but especially here in Central Ohio. But we'll get into a little bit more of the numbers a little bit later.
Cheryl?
I think I might be coming at this from a little different perspective. I don't disagree with Bill. The numbers are, as he says, what the numbers are. In terms of the net, we have new business applications and we have fails. But I think what we're seeing is that the number of new business applications is exploding. If we look at the census data, new business applications are up 50% relative to their average between 2010 and 2019. Now, do many of those businesses fail? Absolutely. But what we're seeing, I think, is a very, very strong enthusiasm for what we call making a job rather than taking a job. And we see that in our students who are coming in. We have an Entrepreneurial and Innovation Scholars Program, and it is the most popular scholars program on campus. We have over 60 freshmen who come that we admit to that program every year. We see an enormous, I think, culture change going on at Ohio State among our faculty in terms of creating businesses out of university-owned IP. I can tell you that when I first started at Ohio State in January of 2013, we had 12 active startup companies. Today we have over 105. And now we created 150 over the time period, so there is a failure rate. But that is because more and more people are trying to bring these technologies to market through what I would call the more entrepreneurial efforts, through the formation of a startup company and the application of private capital.
And we're going to touch on some of the things that Steve and Cheryl both said in some upcoming questions. But I want to kind of go back to the why behind sort of these opposing things that we're seeing. So first, Bill, can you shed some light on some of the factors behind these trends and why there's been this decline?
Well, first of all, what I just heard is very encouraging, very exciting. And the numbers that I work with don't really reflect the pandemic, but it doesn't really surprise me a bit that the rate of entrepreneurship has picked up, simply because there was so much dislocation. People were at home for months, and so that has led to a lot of self-reflection. There was a Pew survey saying that more than 1 in 4 folks were thinking about actively thinking about changing their careers. And so entrepreneurship is certainly one way to go. The reasons behind the problems that we've seen in Central Ohio are, first of all, I think that we have a growing but still fairly low concentration of foreign-born individuals. If I remember correctly, the nationwide, almost 8% of foreign-born individuals are self-employed in a partnership or a sole proprietorship, compared to about 5% of people in general. There's that, and another correlation that I ran into is between small business formation and big businesses. The higher your concentration of really, really big businesses in your region, the lower the small business formation rate, all else equal.
And we'll, again, touch on some more of that, but I want to hear from, Steve and Cheryl about why you think you're both seeing, this healthier startup and small business scene in Central Ohio, and, from your view, why Columbus has been a little bit insulated from some of this.
So for a few years ago, and now this was pre-COVID, but Forbes ranked Columbus as one of the best cities in which to scale a startup. And I think that has a lot to do with the ecosystem that's been developed within Columbus. We have some incredible partners, and the Columbus Partnership has been amazing in helping foster an economic environment that supports new business formation. One of the things that Ohio State did back in 2012, our Board of Trustees allocated $100 million to invest in funds that support our startup ecosystem. Over that time, we've invested that $100 million in 10 different funds that represent the funding continuum from very, very early pre-stage to Series A and Series B. And the money in and of itself isn't sufficient, but that money combined with the intellectual capital that exists around the university and in Central Ohio has attracted some incredible management teams. And that's the value proposition I think that we offer, is that we have some great technology, we have access to capital, we have a state that supports the startup ecosystem through grant funding and through subsidizing some of the early stage funding vehicles. And that has really served to attract a lot of entrepreneurs to our area who are willing to start businesses here.
Yes, Cheryl, I would agree wholeheartedly that one of the advantages of Central Ohio and what we have in our marketplace, because ECDI has the vantage point of looking at some different marketplaces in Ohio, because we've been invited to do what we do in several different marketplaces. And one of the critical things, and one of the things that we see that is missing in a lot of different places, especially the niche that we try to serve, the focus of the underbanked and unbanked and minority communities, is you can train people and you can provide technical assistance free or subsidized low of charge, and you can provide all the resources you want. Mentoring is very important as well. But without the funding, without the liquidity, the ability to help get started, be it the type of equity that Cheryl's talking about, or the type of loans that ECDI provides, which are loans as small as $750 all the way up to $500,000. That's what's critical in kind of fueling the growth of a local small business ecosystem, in my opinion.
Something I think Bill and Steve have both mentioned, according to a study from the Small Business Administration, the business ownership rate and business formation rate are both higher among immigrants than non-immigrants. And a Brookings study also found that immigrants play an outsized role in U.S. high-growth entrepreneurship. Are we seeing this diversity in entrepreneurship in Central Ohio? And if not, what can we do to help build that up?
I think we are. Insofar as the numbers go down to the local level, I think the diversity of business ownership is pretty good here, but we can certainly always do more. We can. When I talk about the resources that are available to small businesses, I have to call them well-kept secrets. and we need to change that. When I was starting my business almost 12 years ago, just about my first stop was the Small Business Development Center to get some free counseling. And the only reason why I knew that even existed was that the SBDC shared office space with the Columbus Chamber, where I was working during my first few years there. And there are resources like ECDI, there are resources at the Columbus Library. Just the ability to go and research industries and companies at the Columbus Library is tremendous. And so that alone, I think, helps overcome the fear factor that all of us experience. I overcame mine by talking to everybody I could think of for 6 months before I pulled the cord and said, okay, I'll get off here, please.
Yep. Anything to add?
I do. ECDI began in 2004, and at the time we started ECDI, a lady named Ina Kinney was the founder, and we came from another organization, and her focus was at that time about 80% of our clients, maybe 90%, were refugees and asylees. So our pedigree is one in which we started out serving and helping people, helping to educate people about our system of capitalism and couple that with technical assistance and funding. But we did a lot of work in the Somali community and the Ethiopian community. And that's kind of how ECDI started, with really small loans up to $35,000. We carry that tradition forward today, although we help any kind of disenfranchised communities, but it's still about 25% of our fundings every year to help now even next generation Somali businesses, for instance. So that has been a critical part to our growth, and we hope that it will continue. And we know we're going to see an Afghani influx in the next couple years, and we welcome that. And we will, we will definitely be there to try to help them develop their businesses as well.
From a diversity perspective, we see that small business formation is very critical for folks who have been historically disadvantaged. When they hit a wall and can't get forward in the traditional business community, starting a business is a pretty compelling story. If we look, the women-owned businesses had experienced the largest increase over the past year of 13%. And if we look at all of women-owned business, 47% of women-owned businesses are owned by women of color. So these are amazing vehicles to advance economic development in our communities. But I say where I think that I see at our university where we fall short. So we have many students who come to Ohio State who are incredible researchers, great inventors. We'd love for them to stay on with our startup companies here in Ohio. And the visa limitations imposed on them really prevent that from happening. And if I were going to change something with regard to our foreign-born entrepreneurs, it would be to expand our student visas into the startup space.
Great.
One thing that I'm hearing from what Steve and Cheryl are saying that I'd like to underline is that starting a business can be a great way for somebody with barriers to employment, whether that's being a foreign refugee, a foreign immigrant, whether it's having arrests on your record, whether it's just having emotional challenges, mental challenges. Folks with barriers to traditional employment can start businesses that become very successful.
That kind of leads into a great question. ECDI, you're talking about what you've historically done, but I know you just also started a social enterprise hub, which is, exactly what Bill is talking about, people with barriers to employment, starting their own businesses, or providing business opportunities for them. So can you tell us a little bit more about what ECDI is doing in that realm, and then maybe expand on some of the other services you provide?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, we're all about knocking down barriers to both employment and business ownership. So what Susan just mentioned, was this particular program which kind of falls under remember I talked about educate, invest, innovate. And innovate is our incubation programs. And so we have something that you might all have heard of that's been around for like 10 or 12 years called the Food Fort, which is a system of commercial kitchens that allow people at low expense, low risk to try out their food concept and try to grow their food concept, whether they're a caterer, a cheesecake maker, a coffee brewer, whatever they might be. And so we've had some companies coming out of that very successfully. We also have a food truck commissary where we feel like we kind of helped kick off the big boom in food trucks in Central Ohio, and to this day we have about 18 that kind of reside with us. But another area that we were always very concerned with and focused on as mentioned earlier, are helping people that might have multiple barriers to employment or business ownership. And we do that in several ways, and one of which was just mentioned, which is our social enterprise incubator. And that's a program in which we're trying to help prop up and support through technical assistance and funding and training business owners who are focused on employing people that might have multiple barriers to employment. So that's something that's within the last year and a year and a half, and we're really, really proud of that program. Another program that we have another mechanism that we have to break down some of those barriers is we have a multitude of different funding sources. We're not only an SBA lender, but we have a lot of bank funding sources, a lot of municipal funding sources. The Columbus Foundation, for instance, is a funding source. So therefore, we don't have restrictions of some governmental or highly regulated funding sources that might prevent us lending to somebody who, say, might have, a felony in their background. So that's another way that we knock down some barriers.
Great. And Cheryl, will you tell us more about the Keenan Center for Entrepreneurship and some of the programs and services you provide?
Absolutely. So the mission of the Keenan Center is really to foster a culture of entrepreneurship at Ohio State. And the way we do that is through the support and development of startup companies and the encouragement and education of founders. And those founders can be faculty, staff, students, or alumni from Ohio State. So we offer a variety of different programs. We have accelerator programs. We have mentorship programs. We do entrepreneurial education. We give workshops and boot camps and training. We have a whole funding continuum for capital. We have a management recruitment program. So if you have an idea and you need to put a team in place behind it, we will help you with that. And I think one of our most exciting for entrepreneurs is the possibility of taking a technology that's been developed at the university that has hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of research behind it, and we will help that entrepreneur set up a company, build a team, license that technology into the company, and provide them with a series of grant funding vehicles that, if they qualify, can give them up to $300,000 to kickstart that business. And then support them once that business is formed with a variety of additional resources. Those tend to be our most highly technical companies based on really high technology, but we're also supporting our student businesses, which is incredibly fun. Our students come to us with ideas. Some of them, this is the first time that they're thinking of something they want to do entrepreneurially. We also have students who have gone through and they've become serial entrepreneurs. They keep trying out different concepts. And we teach them the process of how they go through customer validation, their market assessment, what their go-to-market strategy is. And we measure our success really not so much on, is the business successful? Did it become Facebook or Google or whatever? We look to see, have we given those students a really good entrepreneurial skill set? Because as we all know from the failure rate of startup companies, it's high, and the first few may not be successful. But if we give the students the skill to learn how to launch a successful business, on their 5th or 6th try, this might be something that turns out to be incredibly successful, a good employer, good for economic development, good for the student, allows them to live their passion. And I'll just add one more thing, is that we see more and more of our students looking to create a strong social impact with what they're doing. They have a real care for how their technology, how their idea will benefit the world. And I think that's something that we can be very proud of as a community, in that the technologies coming out of Ohio State, the ideas coming out of our student population, there really is such a benefit to the rest of the world population.
I'm sure we could certainly have an entire panel about these social impact businesses and how that's growing, and it's all really exciting to see. But hearing you talk about the programs and services your organizations provide, it kind of sort of represents these two realms of entrepreneurship. ECDI, you have sort of these Main Street businesses, in the Keenan Center, some more of these high-growth tech startups. So Bill, from an economic impact level, can you speak a little to the interdependency of those two and why they're both important?
They are definitely both important for very different reasons. The kind of businesses that Cheryl's center works with are scalable. They can grow very large. They can employ lots of very well-paid folks and draw money in from outside the region, which is how incomes and wealth and employment increase. On the other hand, what I like to call the coffee shop on the corner is just as important, but for a very different reason, and that's this. That business, by and large, functions by drawing from local suppliers. On the other hand, if you've got a chain, that chain's operations are centralized in order to be efficient. And that's certainly good. It's certainly important. But the point is that if you buy a cup of coffee at a local coffee shop, many more of your dollars stay here in the region, 3 to 4 times as much as the dollars that maybe flow out to, I don't know, Seattle. And so it really does make a difference. And my argument is that keeping dollars in the community is just as impactful, has exactly the same economic impact as bringing them in. So you definitely need both.
Which is, I think, the technology companies that are formed in Ohio and the larger companies that we've been able to attract to Ohio as a result of our technology expertise serve to create an infrastructure that I think benefits small business. We all saw when everyone stayed home during COVID, the coffee shops, the restaurants, the hair salons. I mean, all of these businesses were so negatively impacted because people weren't here and people weren't going out. I think the more vibrant our local economy, it really provides benefits to all.
Yeah, that infrastructure, if you're thinking about technology, the infrastructure can benefit the large companies that are here, the headquarters, the manufacturing firms, and make it easier to attract new ones in. If you can point to these technology firms and say, look, we have the people, we have the technology that your business needs to grow and thrive. So I think that's a very compelling argument. And the other businesses serve to improve our quality of life, which is equally important.
Steve.
Another great example of that is, that's really near and dear to my heart, is a program we have at ECDI called Capital for Construction. And this is a program in which we're trying to help grow minority contractors. The city of Columbus has grown exponentially. The commercial real estate market is amazing. You see cranes everywhere, projects beginning, apartment buildings, mixed use, et cetera. But most of those projects are obviously won by big contractors and big primary contractors, which is great. But we also hear that there's a workforce problem in getting them to help them with their trades in the different trades and the smaller subs. And there's a misconnect there. And over the years, there's literally only been 2 or 3 large African-American owned contractors grow in our city despite the exponential growth. So we have a program where we try to help provide technical assistance and training and infrastructure for minority contractors who have proven that they have the skills to bid on jobs, but they just don't maybe have the financial wherewithal to wait to get paid, because the way the commercial construction industry works is you get on a job, you hire people, you buy materials, and then you get paid 120, 150 days later. So we also created a mobility loan product. So our goal is to enable us to connect these smaller minority contractors with the big folks in town, and so that they can continue to get on bigger and bigger jobs and have more jobs simultaneously. So when Bill talked about connecting, the big companies and the smaller companies, this is another example of where we're trying to do that. And I think it's successful, but it's a slow process because the minority contractor community has been so disenfranchised for so many years that it takes a while to build their capacity and infrastructure to run their businesses. But we're optimistic that we're on the right track.
That's great. I think we've heard a lot of good examples about some of the things Columbus is doing well and some exciting programs. But now I kind of want to flip that and talk a little bit about what can we do better to further foster, small business development and growth.
Well, I think just getting the word out that these resources are here, I think that would help. You have to understand that the biggest barrier to starting a small business, and I speak here autobiographically, is the fear factor. It's just understanding what it takes to run a business, which is very different from the skills of starting a business. You have to have both. And so networking entrepreneurs, perhaps better than we are currently, mentorship programs, I think, would be very, very important. I'll certainly talk to anybody who wants to start a business.
Cheryl.
I would say, I'm biased, so, when someone asks me a question, what do we need, I would always go to more focus and funding on small and micro business. Bill mentioned, that in Columbus, we have done an amazing job of attracting big businesses. And, there's been great tax incentives given for that, and there's been a lot of dollars spent on that. And as a funding community, we've spent a fraction of those dollars investing in organizations like ours and others who support to uplift, minority, women-owned, new American-owned businesses. So the funding infrastructure can always improve, and we're always at the forefront of trying to do so. It might sound self-serving, but these programs don't run themselves, so that's what we try to do. The other thing that I think is critical is that, and it was mentioned again earlier, is the navigation piece. Like when Bill went to start his consulting business, where do I go? Well, he knew to go to the SBDC by happenstance, but a lot of people just don't know where to start, and then you do a search and all these different resources come up. Some of them are valid, some of them are out of business. So the true navigation process, I know we're working on it, and the city's working on it, and the county is working on it, but we haven't quite gotten that right yet either, so we need to do something about that.
I agree. I thought that that Bill's comment on all of our resources being such a great secret, that really sort of rang true, because we do have so many resources here in Columbus. I mean, how many knew that, like, if you wanted to start a business, you don't need to come up with your own idea. You can come to Ohio State. You can pick up a technology that has great potential, that's been vetted through all sorts of research dollars, and you would have the opportunity to be supported and funded in bringing that technology to market if you have the right level of expertise. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to put out there. We're trying to use social media a lot more to reach people, and we're working with our students. And I would say that all of that gets to more of a climate of changing the culture. You see more and more as our students come in that being an entrepreneur, starting a business, is much more acceptable as a career choice than it was, I would say, even 10 years ago. There's such an excitement around this, and we actually work with within the curriculum that entrepreneurship is not a business school topic. The Keenan Center serves the entirety of campus because entrepreneurship actually lives everywhere across the university. And so giving our students and our faculty and our alumni access to resources like our mentoring service, like access to capital, like our workshops, are all very important in reducing the fear that you were talking about before, and just letting people, I guess one of the things that we like to say is letting people dream about what if the impossible were possible.
And you know, one other thing that we might want to think about is introducing the idea of business ownership and entrepreneurship in our K through 12 schools. Junior Achievement does a great set of programs along those lines, but I think we need to expose every student in the area to the possibility that, hey, maybe one of these days you can own a business, and here's what it's like.
And we have so many folks that are sort of accidental entrepreneurs. You're a musician and you didn't know that you were going to be running your own studio someday, or an artist who's running her own gallery, or a medical clinician who's running her own practice. So there's a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurship, and getting people really early on, our students, to develop the entrepreneurial mindset and that way of thinking, I think it's incredibly important.
I agree 100% with what both of you are saying, and I'm so excited, and I want to disclose something, but I can't. So I got to do with a major high school, prominent high school in the city of Columbus. We're working on a program, but we're not quite there yet, so I can't. But we think it's critical as well, and we want to move into the youth entrepreneurship space as well.
Very, very cool.
We'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audience in just a few minutes. So if you have a question, please make your way to the microphone now. But before we do audience questions, just want to quickly touch on one last thing. I know this came up a little bit earlier. We saw this huge surge of businesses starting during the pandemic. You know, folks were laid off, folks were at home, they finally started to start that business. So quickly, just want to hear a little bit from, each of you. Bill, maybe you can talk about how this is going to impact the numbers. And then, Cheryl and Steve, did you kind of see that surge within your organizations?
Well, the numbers that I'm looking at aren't absolute as much as they are rankings. And so in order to move the rankings, we have to do better here than the other metros do. Certainly, every tenth of a percentage point that we can raise these rates is a great thing, and it helps our economy. But I am hoping that that we can sort of eat other folks' lunch.
Great goal. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, our our experience during COVID was that we were needed more than ever. We put approximately $24 million of what I would call ordinary lending on the street during the primary COVID year, or 15 months, and $44 million of PPP money. And you got to remember, our average size loan is just $23,000, so that's a whole lot of loans. So the demand was there. As a matter of fact, and I don't like to brag, but this one I have to because we've been nipping at the heels of this for so long, there's 180 microloan intermediaries licensed in the United States, and we just got word that our little ECDI microlender here in Columbus, Ohio is the #1 by volume in the country. So we were pretty excited about that.
You know, I don't think we saw a dramatic decrease or increase in our populations in new business formation over COVID. Our students and our faculty just kept doing what they'd always been doing. I would say where we probably felt the biggest impact, I guess there were two. There were some of our already formed portfolio companies that just took off because of COVID. So many of our because so many of our businesses are technology-based, COVID benefited them. On the other side of the equation, you know, I would say that the PPP loans were incredibly important to many of our small businesses as well, that were impacted exactly the opposite, where they were just doing, for example, trials within skilled nursing facilities. Well, that completely stopped during COVID. So having that sort of support to allow those businesses to live to fight another day was really important.
And now we'll move to questions. It's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. Jane Scott of CMC is curating questions from the live stream audience. For our in-house audience, please join Jane at the microphone. Please keep your questions brief and to the point. Jane, what is our first question?
Wonderful, thank you. And as Susan said, any of you have questions, we'll trade off from online to questions online. So Mary Jo Hudson from Squires Patton Boggs, please discuss how small retail businesses are pivoting to adapt and address market changes associated as customers move from to hybrid working environments.
Well, from our experience, and we do, you know, our 5 main sectors are food, home health care, home daycare, construction, and retail. And retail we define very broadly. So in the businesses that we help, it's a whole range. Some are really sophisticated in pivoting and having online engines and doing a lot of their sales online, and, you know, and having fulfillment just like you would expect of a larger retailer. Some of them don't even have very good access to broadband, so we've had to help them totally pivot their business models in other dramatic ways. Our food-oriented businesses have done a lot of home food prep and obviously food delivery. That's one that's been very, very common. But it's really all over the board, but we have seen a tremendous amount of resilience in pivoting among our portfolio, that's for sure.
Great. Go ahead to the next question.
It's a great presentation. Really glad to hear all three of you. I'm Bill Wayhoff with Steptoe and Johnson PLC here in Columbus. And I was wondering, I know Jobs Ohio is oriented toward, you know, bringing in jobs from out of state and whatnot, but what role, if any, can Jobs Ohio play in funding the missions that you have and assisting in funding those missions? Thank you.
So yeah, the university works with Jobs Ohio on a number of different fronts. So as we develop, as our expertise, I would say, becomes more known, for example, our gene and cell therapy expertise between Ohio State and Nationwide Children's Hospital has attracted a lot of attention because of the spin-outs that have done so well. Then the ability to attract large companies to come in, and rather than after they make an acquisition, rather than taking that business and moving it outside of Columbus, having Columbus be another hub or another headquarters. And Jobs Ohio has been a really good partner in that effort.
And real quick, from the ECDI perspective, we are still looking for ways to work with Jobs Ohio, but one of the sister agencies, formerly Development Services, now Department of Development again, had funded ECDI at the beginning of the pandemic, a $10 million loan fund, incredibly low interest to us, that we loaned to MBAC and other minority-owned companies at 2%. So that's been a great contribution from the state of Ohio.
And we cannot forget the federal resources that are available, the Small Business Administration and the Small Business Development Centers, which are federally funded. So I could go in and get free counseling. Anybody can go in and get free counseling. So those resources exist too.
Great. So this question is from Hugo Trucks. Along the same line, how is the shortage of employees going to affect startups?
Well, it's not good, and we're hearing that. You know, we have a lot of restaurants and food service businesses, as I mentioned, food trucks, retail in our portfolio, and it's difficult. You have to pay people more and more. So it's lifestyle, creativity in terms of what, we're trying to coach our businesses to offer to their would-be employees, but it's a really difficult conundrum right now. Employees and future employees are really calling the shots right now, and it's difficult. I'm sure it's difficult on all of your businesses. It's been difficult in ECDI, our own growth in our, we're in the business of helping to start and grow businesses, and it's difficult for us to find all the people we need in a prompt manner to keep up with the growth. So it's going to continue to be a challenge.
Small restaurants, locally owned restaurants, is one of the big things that I'm worried about as we see this big shift, the great resignation and the need to pay workers more and more. I would argue they deserve to be paid more in many cases than they are, but that puts a big squeeze on these businesses' profits, along with the increasing food cost. And so if you cannot pass those cost increases along to your customers in the form of higher menu prices, then you may have to shut down. And that's a big concern of mine.
I do a lot of food and beverage coverage, and I think literally every restaurant I've talked to in the last 6 months is like, can you add that we're hiring in there? And, restaurants adjusting hours, and you're, speaking of the margins, it's a notoriously low margin business anyways, so compounding all this, it's been heartbreaking to watch for sure, but.
And I'll just add that I think we're at a period of time of dislocation, and dislocation is always painful, but it does also create some opportunities. And I'd say two things. One is I was in a restaurant the other day where a few of us were trying to navigate the online kiosk, and we're cursing it as like it didn't pick up the different things that we wanted. And we were recalling back in the day when we switched from from our gas tank being filled up by an attendant to having to do it ourselves. So I do think there's this process of adjustment. I do think we'll see a lot more technology in small businesses, and I think that creates a opportunity for new technologies to come in and look at how can they make life easier for small businesses. And then what that does, of course, is it creates a very large demand for the students coming out of Ohio State, which makes us very attractive to employers.
Unfortunately, you might have to think of another analogy, because I think our audience might be like, gas attendants, what are you talking about?
Sorry, I'm old.
Me too.
We'll take the next question.
I'm Amanda Sage, and some of you know that I'm a marketing consultant who works with CMC, but I'm also in the process of starting my 5th company and getting my 2nd woman business-owned certification. And I'm curious to hear how you feel the certification process for women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, LGBT-owned, all those different certifications, how that's changed small business ownership, and how you see it continue to affect the supply chain with supply chain diversity, and how the market will adapt and hopefully attract more of those.
Great question, and I'm not going to cop out but a lot of that is handled by my team at my Women's Business Center, so I would encourage you to call ECDI's Women's Business Center, which is just another, it's kind of the front end, our training and technical assistance. I will tell you that we support a less bureaucratic, easier process to gain that certification. We think that sometimes it's too difficult. They ask for too much for a fledgling or, not a very developed business. And that's one of the reasons why our loan funds that have some stipulations in terms of women-owned or minority-owned, we don't make them be licensed, or I forget the designation. We don't make them have the designation. They just need to demonstrate that they're qualified, and then they could qualify for that loan fund. So, but please contact Aminata Soto at our Women's Business Center.
I think we're going to do time for 3 real quick questions here. So, Steve, does ECDI have any kind of program for individuals in the community to invest in small business startups?
Great question. We once had something called Invest Local Ohio, which enabled individuals to invest a minimum of $1,000 and upwards of hundreds of thousands if they wanted to, though no one chose to invest that much. But I think the average investment was $5,000 to $8,000, and we would leverage it with all our other loan funds. It would go, the investment would be an investment note, and we'd pay a return every year, 2% if the investor let us use the money for 3 years, and 5% or 3% if they let us use it for 5 years. Right now, we're in between filings, so that is not available right now, but we are working on doing a new filing.
Hi there, my name is Stephanie Hanna. I'm an attorney and an entrepreneur, and my question for you is, what would you say are the top 1 or 2 characteristics or personality traits of entrepreneurs that make it versus those that don't?
Okay, I'll try this. Absolutely hard-headed persistence, which means that I think this has to be, entrepreneurship is, when you choose what you're heading for, it has to be something that you're passionate about, because you're going to hit a lot of bumps on the road. I mean, this is, that old saying of it takes, like 20 years to become an overnight success, that rings very true. So you need to be very, very persistent. I would say that would be one of the top qualities.
Yeah, and I would say the persistence and tenacity is probably 1 or 1A. The other thing is, I would say you need to know how to block out the noise, know who to listen to and who to ignore. And sometimes that could be the same person depending on the day. But you as the entrepreneur have to, kind of really develop that skill, because you have to so believe in what you're trying to accomplish.
I would say probably it's knowing when and being able to ask for help.
The last one I'd say is, once the money starts coming in, cash flow is king. Know how to manage your cash flow.
Yeah. Have a cushion.
And I'm going to throw in one more, which might sound a little odd, but it's empathy. Your business is solving a problem for someone. You need to know and understand your customer.
My name is Tony Bell with Phoenix Consulting Co., small minority woman-owned business. And my question is, before I get to the question, Bill, you're right, the numbers don't lie. And what I do know as a social scientist is the interpretation, the worldview of the person who's interpreting that data really matters. So thank you for your advocacy. As a small minority-owned, woman-owned business, I can say that it has been difficult to navigate the pandemic. We design coursework in leadership and facilitate those courses. And I feel very fortunate that I had friends who could tell me, hey, there's a resource here, or I got this grant, or I did that. What I can say is that a lot of times in those applications, there were little stipulations that still made it so that applying for something was disparate for my company and for minority-owned companies like mine. What else can you do? What, in addition to all the things that you're doing, can you do to continue to make it possible for those disenfranchised, often left out by some small rule companies, be able to have the same opportunities for funding and connection that majority-owned companies do?
Well, I think first and foremost, it goes back to what we were just talking about, the tenacity. And if you feel like some of these rules or bureaucratic questions or applications are not fair, or they're inherently discriminating in some way, or I don't know if that's what you're saying, but then be willing to bring them up. Don't just walk away. You know, you gotta be, somebody's always got to fight the good fight. And so that would be my number one piece of advice. And then use allies. Like you said, you've been lucky to have some allies and people of influence that have helped you. Go to the well. If they helped you once, they'll help you again. And you know, they're doing a good thing in the bigger picture. So those are the two pieces of advice I give you.
An unfortunate thing that I've run into on occasion is the extreme bureaucratic nature of some of these requests for proposals. I have passed on proposals that I think I could have done very well at simply because I did not have time to fill out a 50-page application. And so to the extent that large companies can make it easier for small companies, micro companies, to access these jobs, the better off we'll be.
Wish we had more time. I've got a whole list of questions we didn't get to, but we'll turn it back over to Ellen Block for our concluding remarks.
So I hope you all found today's forum as interesting as I did, having grown up in a small family business. I think it's really exciting to hear about the resources and support that our community is offering entrepreneurs. Please join us next Wednesday as CMC presents Afghans Settling in Ohio with a panel of experts. Thank you again to our online virtual seat patrons and to the Columbus Dispatch for supporting today's forum. Thank you to today's sponsor, Steptoe & Johnson, today's partner, the Central Ohio African American Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. And a special appreciation to today's speakers, Bill, Steve, Cheryl, and our host, Susan. And thank you all for joining us. All the thanks, right? We're so appreciative. We could not do this without you. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday as the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents another community conversation. Thank you so much.